Marisol Vega had lived in Azalea Glen for 7 years and still didn't feel like she belonged. The neighborhood was too clean, too quiet, too beige. Rows of taupe homes with perfectly mowed lawns, identical shutters, and zero visible personality. It was the kind of place where even wind chimes were discouraged. She had moved there after her divorce, lured by the school district and the promise of peace, but the HOA had made sure to punish any trace of individuality, especially hers. The first violation came a month after she moved in, a polite but pointed letter about the mural she painted on her backyard fence, despite the fact no one could see it unless they were snooping. Next came the complaint about her non-neutral porch lights, then her mailbox flag. But this was about flowerpots. Marisol stood on her front porch, holding the new violation notice like it was radioactive. 3 identical tickets had I too. Come in 3 weeks, each citing the same offense. Non-compliant porch decor, mismatched unapproved flower containers, HOA section 4.8b. Her flower pots were ceramic, hand-glazed, sky blue with trailing ivy she'd grown from cuttings. She'd picked them up from a local artist's booth at the weekend market. Peaceful, homey, and beautiful. Apparently, that was the problem. The kicker. Her next-door neighbor, Candy Lambert, wife of Greg Lambert, current HOA president, had the exact same pots, same size, same shape, same vines even. Candy's were peach, though. And Marisol knew with the kind of certainty that grew after years of unfair treatment that color was the only real issue. So she took a walk. Across the street, 2 other homes had urn-style planters. Down the block, someone had terracotta pots on a wrought iron rack. No one else had received warnings, just her. And when she'd emailed the HOA for clarification, she got a smugly vague reply signed by Greg Lambert himself. Your containers are not within the pre-approved palette for porch accessories, per HOA decor guidelines updated this year. She'd asked for a copy of said guidelines. No response. That night, over a glass of boxed wine and half a pan of enchiladas, she vented to Deja, her best friend and former roommate, now a paralegal with a deep and abiding love for public records. They don't have a palate, Marisol grumbled, stabbing a fork into her rice. They make up rules and only enforce them when they don't like who you are. You think it's a race thing? Deja asked. I think it's a me thing. And maybe also a race thing. Deja's eyebrows arched. You said Greg's wife has the same flower pots? Exact same, just peach. She sells them at the Community Artisan Fair in May, has a booth and everything. Deja's eyes lit up. You're telling me the president's wife is profiting off the same pots you're getting fined for? Marisol paused. Yeah, why? Deja smirked. We're going shopping. The next Saturday, the booth was there just like it had been the year before. Peach and poppy pottery in swirling cursive on the sign. Candy wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, chunky coral jewelry, and a fake smile that barely reached her eyes. When she saw Marisol, "Hi, neighbor," she chirped. "Lovely day for the fair, isn't it?" Marisol smiled sweetly and leaned in. "I was just admiring these pots. They're familiar." Candy blinked, then busied herself with straightening. "Price tags. I think I'll take 3, Marisol added, pulling out her card. Do you happen to have a receipt? Of course, Candy said too quickly. Each one comes with a numbered tag and my business license info. I've got HOA approval for my booth. Perfect, Marisol said, meeting her eyes. I'm sure the board will love that detail. By Monday, the flower pots were on her porch again, this time with the receipts taped to the bottoms and laminated copies nailed to the railing. The same ivy vines, the same ceramic glaze, the same exact style as the HOA president's wife's side hustle. Only now she had proof. She took a picture, Then Deja took a better one. Then they posted it with a caption, "Fined for flowerpots sold by the HOA presidents." Wife curious, no? It went up on the Azalea Glen community group, which had previously been nothing more than lost dog alerts and bake sale flyers. But that night, it exploded. Dozens of comments poured in, a few supportive, many skeptical, some defensive, but then others chimed in. "I got fined for wind chimes in March. They ticketed me for a lavender wreath, said it wasn't seasonal. Wait, my mailbox flag was too reflective. I bet that was made up too." By morning, the HOA inbox was full. Greg had turned off comments on the group post. Candy took down her Etsy store, but it was too late. The cracks had started, and Marisol wasn't done yet. By Tuesday afternoon, Marisol's doorbell rang with a kind of smug punctuality that only came from someone who thought they were in control. She peeked through the blinds. There he was. Greg Lambert, HOA president, golf shirt tucked into khakis, clipboard in hand like he was walking a battlefield instead of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. Behind him stood Nancy Reeves, the HOA's compliance officer, or more accurately, Greg's second-in-command and part-time tattler. Nancy was the kind of woman who wore beige like a badge of honor and looked at Marisol's potted plants like they were graffiti. Marisol took her time opening the door. "Hi there," Greg said, trying to smile. It looked more like a smirk having a seizure. "Just doing our routine porch reviews." "Funny," Marisol replied, "considering mine's the only porch that seems to be part of the routine." Nancy scribbled something down. Greg glanced at the laminated receipt still attached to each flower pot. "We noticed the new additions." "Oh, you mean these," Marisol said, gesturing to them. "From Peach and Poppy Pottery. Local vendor. HOA-approved booth, right?" Greg's smile thinned. "There's been confusion over recent posts online. We wanted to clarify that the board reserves the right to determine aesthetic cohesion for the community." "Right," Marisol said. "And it just so happens that the same pots being sold by your wife are fine on your porch, but not mine." "That's not what we said." "It's exactly what you did," Nancy interrupted. "The issue isn't the pots themselves, it's the non-neutral color tone. Peach is considered a natural accent. Blue is not." Marisol stared. "So now blue is offensive?" "It's not on the approved palette." "You never sent me that?" "Palette? It's available by request," Nancy said quickly. "I did request it. 3 times. Greg cut in again, clipboard shifting from hand to hand. "We're calling a compliance committee meeting Thursday evening. We'd like you to attend. Give your perspective." Marisol crossed her arms. "And what? Plead my case? In front of people who play tennis together every Sunday?" Greg blinked. "It's procedural." "No," she said. "It's performative." He cleared his throat. "You're welcome to bring documentation." "Oh, I will. Don't worry." She closed the door slowly, letting it latch with a satisfying click, and walked back to her kitchen. Deja was already seated at the table with her laptop open, a folder of HOA bylaws printed and color-coded by infraction type. "I heard everything," Deja said. "Do we go nuclear?" Marisol poured herself coffee. "Not yet. We go legal. Thursday, 7 past p.m. Azalea Glen HOA Clubhouse. The compliance committee meetings were usually dull, sparsely attended affairs. But not tonight. Marisol walked in wearing a sunflower yellow blazer, hair pinned high, and a manila folder under her arm like it held state secrets. The room was already buzzing, residents whispering in clumps, eyes darting between her and the folding chairs stacked against the wall. At the head of the room sat the usual suspects: Greg, Nancy, 2 long-time board members, and 1 new face, Kenji. Takahashi, recently elected treasurer after the previous one resigned mid-term. He nodded at Marisol as she entered. a small but meaningful gesture. She took a seat up front. Greg tapped the mic. "We're here to discuss a recent compliance matter regarding porch decor and clarification of color palette enforcement." Marisol raised a hand before he could finish. "I'd like to request that the proceedings be added to the official minutes and that all exhibits be admitted under homeowner review." Greg blinked. "You brought exhibits?" She smiled sweetly. "You said documentation was welcome." From her folder she pulled 3 photos, side-by-side comparisons of her blue flower pots and Candy's peach ones, receipts stapled to the corners. Then she pulled a screenshot of Peach and Poppy Pottery's Etsy listing with Greg's home address listed in the seller info. And then, for the finale, she held up a printed page of the HOA bylaws, highlighted where it states all vendors at HOA-sanctioned events are considered compliant by default. Nancy leaned forward. "Where did you get that clause?" "Page 6. Subsection C. I had Deja cross-reference the bylaws against your March newsletter. You quoted it when promoting the Spring Artisan Fair." Whispers rippled through the room. Greg looked visibly flushed. "Regardless, the interpretation is under board discretion." "Except when it isn't," Kenji interrupted, sliding his copy of the bylaws forward. "Section 7.5 grants homeowner appeal rights if enforcement is proven selective or financially conflicted. That includes relatives of board members." A woman in the back raised her hand. "So if I got fined for my Halloween pumpkins last year, I can file an appeal too?" A man stood up. "I got charged $50 for a red wreath." Another voice. "I was told bird feeders weren't allowed, unless they were inside planters." The room was shifting. Fast. Greg tried to speak, but Nancy leaned over and whispered something in his ear. His jaw tightened. Marisol leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and waited. Because this wasn't just about flower pots anymore. It was about who got to decide what acceptable looked like, and who got punished when they didn't match. The mold. Saturday morning in Azalea Glen was usually quiet. Robin song and sprinklers and the occasional jogger pretending they didn't see their neighbors. Not this Saturday. It started with one house on Dahlia Lane, then another, then 3 more by 10 a.m. By noon it was nearly half the block. Ceramic blue flower pots everywhere, sky blue, powder blue, indigo, cobalt, some hand-painted with vines, some solid, some with tiny stenciled suns or doves or swirls of gold around the rims. Some sat in neat rows by porches, others proudly lined driveways clumped around mailboxes, perched beside welcome signs. Some even had laminated labels, inspired by HOA-approved designs. By afternoon, it had a name, thanks to Deja's Instagram story. The blue wave Marisol stood by her own pots, arms crossed, watching a family across the street carefully place a new pair by their steps. The husband gave her a thumbs up. The wife smiled. The daughter, maybe 6, ran up and handed Marisol a handmade sign in marker. "I like your flowers." Marisol blinked against sudden tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You started a thing," Deja said, appearing beside her with a cold brew in hand. "Congratulations, you're a movement. Feels unreal." "Oh, it's real. People are pissed." Across town, Greg Lambert sat in his home office scrolling through his HOA email inbox like it was a live grenade. Subject: selective enforcement. Subject: ethics complaint, conflict of interest. Subject: reconsideration request, 2023 mailbox. Fine subject: violation of vendor policy. Subject: removal vote inquiry. He slammed his laptop shut and marched into the kitchen. "Candy," he barked, "did you approve any of these people buying those damn blue pots?" She looked up from her tablet, annoyed. "They're not mine. Etsy shut my store down on Monday, remember?" He cursed. "You don't get it. This is mutiny." "No," she said, sipping her lemon water. "This is PR, and you're losing." Monday. Emergency HOA board meeting. The folding chairs at the clubhouse had to be doubled. People stood along the back wall. Some leaned on strollers, some held copies of Marisol's screenshots, some held their own violation letters like war banners. Greg sat at the head table, Nancy beside him. Kenji, to his right, looked resigned. "We called this emergency session," Greg began, "to address concerns regarding the interpretation and enforcement of HOA guidelines." Murmurs. "Some of the community has raised questions about the fairness and consistency of citations issued over the past year, specifically relating to Porch Decor." More murmurs. One laugh. A cough that sounded suspiciously like liar. Nancy chimed in. "We understand people are frustrated. We hope to clarify." Marisol stood up. No raising of hands, no waiting. Just a clean, calm rise from her seat, and a clear voice that cut through the room like scissors through gift wrap. "Clarification isn't what this community wants," she said. "We want accountability." Nancy's jaw tensed. Greg opened his mouth, but Kenji beat him to it. "As treasurer," Kenji said, his voice deliberate, "I reviewed the last 2 years of violation fines. 62% of all aesthetic fines were issued to the same 7 households. 5 of them are families of color, 2 are single mothers." You could hear a pin drop. Marisol's eyes didn't leave Greg's. "So this was never about flowers or curtains or wreaths. It's about control, about who gets to feel like they belong." A voice from the crowd spoke up. "What about the election clause?" "Yeah," another chimed in. "We want a vote." Greg's face went pale. "There are protocols, per Section 9.2 of the bylaws," Kenji said smoothly, holding up a printed page. "If more than 20% of the HOA sign a written request, a board member can be removed via special election." He looked out at the crowd. "We passed that threshold yesterday," gasps. Applause, a whistle. Someone actually said, "Oh, hell yes." Nancy leaned toward Greg and whispered too loud, "I told you to stop fining people over nonsense." His jaw twitched. Marisol didn't smile. She just sat back down like she already knew how this ended. But it wasn't over yet. Not fully. Not until the vote was official. Not until the fine refund demands started. Not until every piece of this house of cards came tumbling down, and she stood with both feet on the pile. By Tuesday morning, Greg's front yard looked like a campaign rally had exploded overnight. Not for him. Against him. Small printed signs lined the grass, each one laminated and stuck with a garden stake. Selective fines. Manx discrimination. "We want refunds." Azalea Glen isn't a dictatorship. Someone had even zip-tied a pot, yes. A blue one. To the HOA mailbox pedestal with a laminated tag, "Justice for Pots." Inside his house, Greg sat slumped at the kitchen island, staring into a cup of burnt coffee like it held answers. "Who's organizing this?" he muttered. "It's a coup." Candy didn't look up from her phone. "It's your job imploding. Congratulations," he glared. "You sold those pots, and you weaponized them." Meanwhile, across the street, Marisol was building something stronger than protest signs. A paper trail. Deja had brought over her portable scanner, a whiteboard, and a Ziploc full of Sharpies. They had receipts spread across the kitchen table. HOA notices, dated emails, screenshots, Etsy listings, printouts of bylaws, and one very useful spreadsheet Deja had compiled from publicly available HOA records, HOA violations, 2022-2024, breakdown by address, demographics, and fine amounts. The totals were staggering. "Okay," Deja said, tapping her pen. "You've got enough here for 3 things. A formal refund petition, a discrimination complaint, and possibly a small claims suit." Marisol blinked. "A lawsuit? Not big. But if we file even 2 of these and they get traction." Greg's toast. "And if the others join you..." Marisol glanced at the list again. "We need a name, something to rally behind." Deja grinned. Already got it. She flipped over her legal pad and showed the heading in blocky letters, the dollar file underneath it. For every dollar they took, we demand it back. Marisol sat back, exhaling. We'll start small. A letter, a demand for transparency. Wednesday, the email that shook the blocket was short, sharp, surgical. Subject, official request for fine refund audit. Azalea Glen, HOA to the Board of Directors, we, the undersigned residents of Azalea Glen, request a full financial audit and itemized breakdown of all homeowner fines issued between January 2022 and April 2024. Per Section 11.3 of the HOA bylaws, all members are entitled to request financial transparency regarding the use and distribution of fine collections. A signed petition from 47 homeowners accompanies this request. We request a response within 14 days. Sincerely, Marisol Vega, Deja Simmons. The undersigned residents of Azalea Glen Deja BCC'd the entire neighborhood email list. Within 5 minutes, Greg responded, or tried to. Subject, RE, official request, this is being handled. Please refrain from spreading further misinformation. Greg Lambert, President, Azalea Glen HOA, but that only made it worse because Deja had already scheduled the post, a screenshot of the original email plus a caption. The HOA took $14,000 in aesthetic fines over 2 years. We're asking, where did the money go? The dollar file to each HOA reform, to selective enforcement. Within 24 hours, the post had over 200 shares across local Facebook groups. Someone tagged a local reporter. Someone else tagged a city council candidate. And someone uploaded a PDF, a clean public version of the dollar file, formatted like a bombshell dossier, with graphs, photos, side-by-side pot comparisons, and anonymized stories from other residents who had been fined. Marisol hadn't just started a protest. She'd created a case. Thursday, the anonymous envelope. It slid through her mail slot just after lunch. No return address. Inside, a USB stick and a typed note. You didn't hear this from me, but check the folder called Executive Minutes. Private. You'll find what you're looking for. Marisol blinked. Her pulse quickened. She showed it to Deja without saying a word. They plugged it in, inside the USB, a folder of meeting minutes, most labeled Executive Session. Confidential. Not the public ones filed with the HOA website. In them, internal discussions, strategy notes, and buried in a plain text file labeled 044-2023 gregnotes.txt, a line that made Deja's jaw drop. Keep pressure on Vega. She's been a visual issue since the mural, fine if necessary to discourage others from going rogue. Marisol felt her heart hammer, targeted by name. There it was, written proof. Her flowerpots weren't a random compliance issue. They were intentional punishment. And now she had the bullet. She wasn't just going to get her money back. She was going to take Greg's position, and she wasn't going to stop there. By Monday, Greg Lambert looked like a man aging in real time. The once cocky golf dad swagger had vanished, replaced by a red-eyed tremble and a mouth that seemed to constantly search for excuses. He wore a polo shirt again, but the collar sagged. His clipboard was gone. His smile had disappeared with it. The audit had begun. Not the official one, not yet. That would take weeks. This was community-led, run by Deja, powered by spite, and sharpened with the precision of 1,000 neighborhood grievances, finally boiling over. At 6 p.m., the clubhouse filled again, this time with folding tables covered in printouts, laptops, and coffee cups. Kenji had helped reserve the room. He even brought donuts. This, Deja said, holding up the binder they dubbed the Blue Book, is everything the HOA tried to hide. Gasps followed her as she flipped through pages. A chart showing that homes owned by residents of color were fined 4x more than white residents. HOA funds spent on catering, $312 for board luncheon at a golf course steakhouse, from fine. Money board meeting reimbursements marked as travel, though the meetings never left the clubhouse. Marisol stood to the side, arms crossed, watching the crowd. This wasn't just catharsis anymore, it was evidence. "What are we supposed to do with this?" asked Mrs. Langston, a widow who'd been fined $75 for planting tulips. "We can't sue, can we?" "Individually, maybe not," Deja answered. "But class action, that's a conversation, especially with this." She slid a printed excerpt of the USB contents across the table. "Fine if necessary to discourage others from going rogue." It was in Greg's words, his tone, his contempt, and it had worked until now. A man in the back stood up. "If we have the numbers, why don't we vote him out already?" Kenji raised a hand. "We need one more step, a special election. The request is in. We just need community turnout." "How long?" someone asked. 2 weeks. Week of the campaign. They didn't call it that publicly, of course. That would have made it sound petty. But behind closed doors it was a campaign. Postcards appeared in mailboxes with the tagline, "Accountability starts at the curb." Door-knocking crews formed in cul-de-sacs. Not aggressive, just curious. "Did you know how much we paid in fines last year? Want a refund? Ever been fined for garden decor? Can I show you something?" It was always the Blue Book. Even teens got involved. Sophia, the girl with the drone from down the block, helped Deja design infographics that went mini-viral on local Facebook and Nextdoor groups. One was a split screen. Left, Marisol's porch with labeled fines. Right, Candy Lambert's identical porch. Approved vendor. Caption, "Guess who got fined?" And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, Candy tried to relaunch her Etsy shop, this time under a new name, Suburban Soul Crafts. But someone, no one admitted who, bought every pot, then posted reviews under each. Beautiful. Reminds me of the ones that got my neighbor fined. Love this, but weird how it's illegal in one color. Does this come with a citation? Within days, Etsy pulled it again. Greg's world was shrinking. The final straw, trash night. Every Wednesday, residents wheeled their bins to the curb, lining the streets in neat rows. But this time, they left something else out front too, attached to each trash can, a laminated HOA violation notice. Some real, some recreated, hung like trophies, mailbox paint chipped, grass 0.5 inches too long, non-seasonal wreath, unauthorized flagpole, curtains visible from street. It wasn't coordinated, but it was united, and it sent a message. Marisol stood by her curb and looked down the street. Nearly every home had a notice clipped to its bin. Blue pots glowed in the dusk, like defiance made ceramic. Greg drove past in his beige SUV, slowing down as he passed Marisol's house. She stood still, arms crossed. He didn't wave, she didn't blink. Thursday, the legal letter delivered by courier, stamped and sealed, from a law office representing several homeowners listed in the dollar file. It demanded full fine refunds for 27 residents, an apology for targeted enforcement, Greg Lambert's immediate resignation to avoid escalation. To civil court, Greg didn't respond. Instead, he left town that weekend for a wellness retreat, according to Nancy's vague email, but no one believed it, because in the clubhouse Deja was already prepping her final weapon, not just for the vote, for the hearing, because the bylaws didn't just allow removal. They allowed public testimony, and in 2 weeks Marisol would stand behind a podium and read Greg's own words into the record. The folding chairs were out again, so were the clipboards, the laminated signs, the cookie tray from Mrs. Langston, and the faint buzz of nervous energy that only shows up when a neighborhood comes together to publicly dismantle its own king. This wasn't a meeting. This was a reckoning. The HOA's special hearing to determine whether Greg Lambert would be formally removed as president began at 6:03 p.m., exactly 3 minutes late, because Nancy Reeves had misplaced the agenda. No one believed her. The clubhouse was standing room only. Local reporter Kelly Rowe from the Willow Creek Post stood discreetly in the back with a notepad and pen. The mayor's aide, just an intern but still, was seated near the refreshment table. The entire town was watching. Greg was not in attendance. Nancy sat stiffly at the front, flanked by Kenji and the 2 remaining board members. Her hair was tight. Her smile tighter. "I'll call the hearing to order," she said, voice clipped. "The board has received a petition, properly executed under Section 9.2 of the bylaws, requesting a vote to remove Mr. Greg Lambert as president of the Azalea Glen HOA. Tonight we will hear statements, present findings, and hold a community vote." Marisol stood when her name was called. No paper, no podium. Just her in the room she had learned to stop fearing. "3 years ago," she began, "I painted a mural on the backside of my fence. It faced no one. It hurt no one. But it wasn't neutral enough." She paused, letting the quiet hang. "I've received 12 violation letters since then. 9 were for aesthetic infractions. None of them matched any written regulation." Behind her, Deja opened a folder and held up the dollar file. Marisol continued, calm and clear. "This isn't about pots. It's about power. It's about who got to define beauty, peace, order, who got to feel like they belonged." She looked out at the rows of neighbors, some she'd never spoken to before all this, some who used to look through her like she wasn't there. "I have proof Greg Lambert targeted me by name. I have receipts that show his wife profited from the same items I was fined for. And I have data, collected by your fellow residents, that proves those fines weren't about community standards. They were about control." Gasps, nods, a cough from the back. Then Marisol read the line from the confidential notes aloud. "Keep pressure on Vega. She's been a visual issue since the mural." Nancy paled. The room went dead silent. Marisol stepped back. "I rest my case. Testimony. The neighbors, one by one they came. Mr. Ellis, fined for a flagpole installed to honor his daughter in the Navy. Sophia's mother, who'd been told her birdbath didn't meet material compliance. An elderly widow who'd been cited for non-seasonal planters, though hers were empty. Even young Marcus, the quiet teen with the ADHD diagnosis, who'd received a warning for his mother's. Porch wind spinner, because it was distracting. Each story chipped away at Greg's legacy. Each voice became a brick in the wall being built between the neighborhood and its former president. Kenji spoke last. He stood slowly, cleared his throat, and read from the bylaws. "A board member may be removed by special election upon 20% petition, and majority vote at public hearing in the presence of a quorum." He looked up. "We've exceeded the petition threshold. We have quorum. All that remains is the vote." He passed around the ballots. They were simple. Remove, retain, fold. Drop, wait. 10 minutes later, Kenji stepped back to the front of the room with the results. The room held its breath. Total votes submitted, 143 to remove, 128 to retain, 15. A beat. Then thunderous applause, laughter, cheers, even some tears. Nancy looked like she might melt into the linoleum. But Marisol stayed quiet, because she knew what came next. Power once removed doesn't just disappear, it creates a vacuum. Someone has to fill it, and her name had already been whispered in hallways, posted in group chats, scribbled on signs next to pots. Kenji turned back to the room. "The board will now accept nominations for interim president." The room didn't. "Hesitate. Marisol Vega," someone shouted, and then it was everywhere, echoing like thunder in a summer storm. She blinked, swallowed, took a breath, but didn't say no. By sunrise, her name was already in the group thread. Marisol's our New president. The HOA might actually start making sense now. Justice for pots and bird baths. She hadn't even said yes yet. The vote to remove Greg had barely cooled when Kenji turned toward her, meeting her eyes like a gentle dare. "Do you accept the nomination?" She hadn't answered. Not officially. But word traveled fast in Azalea Glen. By morning it was gospel. Marisol stood in her kitchen, staring out the window at the blue flower pots on her porch. The ivy had curled beautifully around the edges now, stretching toward the sun like it finally believed it belonged. Deja sat at the table behind her, barefoot, eating a banana over a pile of paperwork. "I haven't agreed," Marisol muttered. "You." "I haven't disagreed. That's not the same," Deja smiled. "The neighborhood trusts you. They chose you. You earned this." Marisol turned. "I didn't ask to lead a revolution." "No, but you kept the receipts. And in suburbia, that's how revolutions start." Later, that week, the first walk through Marisol did the same thing Greg used to. Walked house to house, clipboard in hand, only this time there were no secret violations. She knocked on doors, introduced herself, asked what residents wished the HOA would stop doing. Stop nitpicking grass height. Stop pretending flowers are a threat. Stop sending threats in envelopes. Start listening. She took notes, and where Greg had worn his fake authority like a badge, Marisol wore humility like armor. Mrs. Langston handed her a lemonade on her porch and whispered, "I haven't felt this hopeful since the old board left in '09. Mr. Ellis gave her a salute. "You brought back decency." At the end of the cul-de-sac she met a family that had just moved in, a black couple with twin toddlers and a front yard full of chalk drawings. They looked nervous. "Don't worry," Marisol said, smiling. Sidewalk art is officially encouraged. Deja's grand idea a week later. Deja showed up with a banner she'd designed on Canva. Azalea Glen, where different is beautiful. It hung outside the clubhouse for the Spring Artisan Fair, the first one since Greg's ousting. This time there were booths from everyone. Marisol invited Priya to sell her henna art. Mr. Delgado brought watercolor postcards. The Ramirez twins sold $1 lemonade next to a pay-what-you-want potting table where kids could plant their own ivy vines. Even Candy showed up. She kept her distance. No booth, no straw hat. Just a tentative nod as she walked through the stalls. With her purse clutched to her side like a shield, Marisol didn't confront her. She didn't need to. She just looked at the row of blue pots along the entrance to the clubhouse and smiled. The new bylaws proposal, Kenji helped her draft it. Deja helped her proof it. And when it came time to present it to the board, Marisol stood confidently in front of a packed room, not to tear someone down this time, but to build something better. "We propose that aesthetic violations be limited to safety and structural concerns only, that homeowners receive written warnings before fines, that all decor, including flowerpots, flags, and wreaths, be protected as personal expression unless proven hazardous." People clapped before she even finished. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fiery. It was fair. And that, in Azalea Glen, was finally enough. One last surprise, a week after the vote passed, Marisol came home to find something sitting on her porch steps, a flower pot. Sky blue, but not one of hers. She looked around. No one in sight. Inside the pot, nestled in the soil, was a small white card for standing tall, from someone who didn't know how. A neighbor. She ran her fingers along the curve of the ceramic. It was smooth, cool, familiar, but this one was different. It was a thank you. It took 3 months for the change to settle in, not just in policy but in tone. There were no more anonymous fines stuffed in mailboxes, no more cryptic citations over flower color or porch decor, no more fear in the simple act of decorating one's own home. Instead, Azalea Glen began to look lived in. Children's bikes leaned against porch rails. House numbers gleamed in mismatched brass. Mailboxes bore handmade decals. The fences didn't match anymore, and somehow that made everything look right. The fear was gone. It had been replaced with something warmer. Permission. The final meeting it was Marisol's last official act as interim HOA president. The clubhouse was modestly decorated. A banner read, "Community Matters. Thank you, Marisol." The folding chairs were still there, but this time no one sat rigid. People laughed, greeted one another by name. Deja passed around cookies, shaped like little ceramic pots with blue icing. Kenji stood at the front with a new clipboard. This, one with a laminated sticker of a sunflower. "We're here tonight to vote in a permanent president. We've received one nomination." The room stirred, and a signed note declining the nomination. He looked at Marisol and smiled. She stood slowly, took the mic, and looked out at the room that once made her feel invisible. "I never wanted this role forever," she said. "And I'm proud I didn't have to keep it to prove anything. You did that yourselves." She gestured toward the crowd. "You showed up. You demanded better, and you got it. That's what makes a neighborhood work. Not rules, responsibility." There was a beat of quiet, then a swell of applause, and in the back someone raised their hand. "Wait," called Mrs. Langston. "Who's going to keep things fair now?" Marisol smiled. "All of us." Symbolic closure. That night, Marisol stood alone on her porch. A soft breeze carried the scent of lilacs and barbecue and fresh soil. Porch lights blinked on one by one across the block. She knelt beside the original 3 pots, the ones that started everything, and added one more, the anonymous gift, the card still tucked inside. She pressed her palm to the rim and whispered, "Thank you." Then she stood, looked out at the street, and for the first time in years felt no tension in her chest, no anxiety about being watched, no dread of a white envelope in the mail, just peace, hard-won, earned, shared. The flowerpots stayed. The bylaws changed. The power shifted, and the neighborhood learned that beauty didn't come from matching paint or silent porches. It came from difference. It came from voice. It came from people like Marisol. Ending scene. The camera pulls back. We see the street. No longer uniform, no longer rigid. Porches glowing with mismatched joy. Wind chimes, flags, planters. Laughter from somewhere behind a fence, and in the center, one blue pot, chipped slightly on the edge, ivy curling high, a symbol of rebellion and of home.